Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really profound paradigm shift in men's health, specifically looking at the evolving and honestly fascinating relationship between testosterone therapy and prostate cancer. For decades, there's been this fundamental tension in the medical world. On one hand, we have treatments that are absolutely incredible at curing a terrifying disease. But on the other hand, we really have to ask ourselves, what happens when the cure preserves a patient's life but severely impacts their day-to-day vitality? It brings us right to a harsh, deeply provocative question. What if the treatment that saves your life completely ruins your quality of life? Because sadly, this is the reality for countless prostate cancer survivors right now. The primary treatments out there, things like radical prostatectomies and radiation, are highly successful at eradicating cancer, but they often leave men feeling completely stripped of their vitality because they drastically reduce the body's natural testosterone levels. To put that into perspective, up to a third of men who undergo these treatments experience debilitating symptoms of hypogonadism, which you probably know as low T. And we aren't just talking about feeling a little tired. We're talking about severe fatigue and low energy, a complete loss of libido, erectile dysfunction, decreased muscle and bone mass, and even severe depression and mood changes. For many of these guys, surviving the cancer can start to feel like a Pyrrhic victory. You know, you won the battle, but your daily existence is overshadowed by this profound physical and emotional toll. Section 1. The Medical Dogma. 80 Years of Fear. So you might be wondering, if the symptoms are really this severe, why not just give these survivors testosterone therapy to help them feel normal again? Well, to understand why doctors have historically been absolutely terrified to treat these men with testosterone, we have to trace the timeline back a bit. Back in 1941, researchers Huggins and Hodges published the Androgen hypothesis. They proved that castrating men, or lowering their testosterone, caused metastatic prostate cancer to regress, while giving them exogenous testosterone made it grow. This was monumental. It literally earned Charles Huggins the Nobel Prize in 1966. And because of that massive accolade, this dogma went completely unchallenged for decades. It actually wasn't until a massive scientific plot twist arrived in 2014 with Dr. Abraham Morgenthaler's saturation model that the medical world finally began to reconsider everything.
But for over 80 years, the medical community operated on one terrifying metaphor. Testosterone acts as fuel to the fire of prostate cancer. That 1941 discovery firmly established the belief that testosterone and prostate cancer had a direct, linear relationship. Basically, doctors were taught that giving a prostate cancer survivor testosterone was quite literally pouring gasoline on a fire.
Section 2. The Saturation Model, a scientific plot twist.
Okay, let's dive into this. The saturation model is the evidence-based theory that androgen receptors in the prostate actually have a maximum limit. Once those receptors are filled, adding more testosterone has absolutely zero further influence on cancer growth. It's kind of like a sponge. If you have a bone-dry sponge and you pour a little water on it, it expands and absorbs it, right? But once that sponge is fully saturated, pouring a whole bucket of water on it does absolutely nothing. The extra water just runs off. Well, the exact same principle applies to testosterone and the prostate. Now, what's really interesting about this specific number, 250 nanograms per deciliter, is that research pinpointed it as the exact blood concentration where that prostate sponge reaches full saturation. If a man's testosterone is below this, adding testosterone might stimulate prostate tissue. But once you hit that 250 mark, the receptors are completely maxed out. Pushing the testosterone levels higher, up into normal healthy ranges, doesn't stimulate further prostate growth. It simply gives the man his vitality back without feeding the cancer. It's a total game changer.
Section 3. The Clinical Reality, Localized versus Advanced Cancer.
This revelation fundamentally changes everything we thought we knew. But how does this actually play out in a clinic today? Well, when we look at the data, a really stark contrast emerges based on the severity of the disease. For men who have been definitively treated for localized prostate cancer, meaning the cancer was caught early and confined entirely to the prostate, testosterone therapy is slowly becoming an accepted standard to improve their quality of life. The data shows it just doesn't increase the risk of recurrence. Conversely, though, for men with advanced or metastatic prostate cancer, testosterone therapy remains an absolute contraindication. Because the cancer has spread, it's still a strict no-go zone. So the crucial point is how international medical guidelines currently view this treatment based on a patient's specific risk group. For the low-risk or cured group, guidelines affirm that therapy can be safely offered to symptomatic men. For the intermediate or high-risk group, the data is a bit more limited, so that requires very careful shared decision-making between the doctor and the patient. And for the advanced or metastatic group, it's highly risky. It is simply too dangerous based on our current understanding of the disease. But
You know, science doesn't always translate immediately into everyday medical practice. Tracking prescribing trends in the United States tells a really fascinating story. Back in 2003, usage of testosterone therapy post-cancer was basically non-existent, at just 0.5%. Then, as the new data surrounding the saturation model started emerging, it spiked to nearly 5% in 2013. But look at what happened next. It dropped off and plateaued at just 1.8%. This clearly shows us that despite the promising new science, a lot of doctors in the real world are still incredibly hesitant to abandon that 80-year-old dogma. The fear of that old gasoline on the fire metaphor is a really hard habit to break.
Section 4. The Frontier, the Spirit Trial.
To finally move past that hesitation, the medical community needs absolute, irrefutable proof. And this brilliantly illustrates what a rigorous gold standard study actually looks like. The SPIRIT trial is the very first randomized, placebo-controlled trial of testosterone therapy in prostate cancer survivors. They're taking 142 men with confirmed low testosterone post-prostatectomy. Half get 12 weeks of testosterone injections and half get a placebo. Their primary goal? To rigorously measure improvements in overall sexual activity, energy, and physical function, all while ensuring the absolute safety of the patients.
Getting this trial off the ground, however, was a monumental hurdle. Trial recruitment was incredibly challenging. I mean, think about it. You're asking men who just survived prostate cancer to take a hormone that for 8 decades was called the literal fuel for their disease. That shows just how deep those ingrained medical fears go. Yet, for the men who did enroll, patient retention remains remarkably high at 89%. These men are just deeply dedicated to finding a solution because they are living with the daily exhausting burden of hypogonadism.
It all really comes back to the human element, which is captured perfectly in this quote from Prostate Cancer UK. The question of how we help survivors lead more normal lives is now more pertinent than ever. With modern medicine, we're getting incredibly good at extending the quantity of years for prostate cancer patients. But true survivorship has to include a high quality of life, right? Beating cancer absolutely shouldn't mean having to accept a life devoid of energy, intimacy, and vitality.
Ultimately, this builds to our most important question for the future of medicine. As we conquer cancer, is surviving enough, or do we deserve to thrive? The evolving science around testosterone therapy shows us that we might not have to choose between a cure and a fulfilling life. The medical dogma is shifting, the saturation model is proving that the body's mechanisms are wonderfully complex, and trials like SPIRIT are paving the way for a brand new era of men's health. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you know.